Hey folks, every summer it's hard to decide what kind of vacation do you want to take. Do you want a relaxing natural getaway or do you want a new cultural artistic experience? Luckily this summer you don't have to choose. The Williamstown Theater Festival runs July 17th to August 3rd among the beautiful Berkshire Mountains in northwestern Massachusetts. It brings over 130 artists to the stage for nearly 100 performances. Discounted hotel rooms are available now. Go to WTFestival.org and immerse yourself in theater this summer. That's WTFestival.org. Today on CityCast DC, hey, at the end of last week, there was a big switcheroo in an office that's really important to local DC. That's the U.S. Attorney's Office, which in our city also acts as the local prosecutor. Donald Trump abruptly pulled the nomination of Ed Martin, who is the January 6th firebrand. He'd been one of the most controversial appointees in memory. But the replacement is also quite a shock. It's Jeanine Pirro, the bomb-throwing Fox News personality. So what does this mean for us? NBC4's Ted Oberg covers the office, and he's here to explain. Today is Monday, May 12th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Ted.
Hey, Mike.
Thank you for being here.
Of course. Thanks for thinking of us.
So, Jeanine Pirro, I think a lot of people, know her as a Fox News personality, right-wing bomb thrower. She actually has a longer and a somewhat more traditional resume before that. What is her background?
I think, look, when people first hear about her, the first thing that comes to mind for most people is going to be her work for Fox News. 19 years, right? That is a long time to be on Fox News, starting as a legal analyst and now as a co-host of The Five, one of their highest rated programs. But on paper, her resume would sort of fit this job a little bit more than Ed Martin's would have. She, throughout most of the 90s and into the early 2000s, was a judge and a district attorney in Westchester County, New York, which is sort of the northern suburbs of New York City. And according to people who knew her work then, was a pretty good DA. She's credited with sort of starting one of the first domestic violence units in an office like hers. She was a Republican elected at a time when that county's presidential results were sort of almost universally voting for Democrats. So she has some political success. It means she's been sort of vetted in a pretty serious media market, so she is not an unknown commodity to a lot of people.
Right. I assume that the Westchester population is probably as big as or bigger than DC's. But I'm going to go on a limb here and say I don't think Donald Trump probably knew of her and clearly admires her so much because of her record as a local district attorney. What is the basis of their rather long and exuberant friendship?
So according to some reporting out of New York, from some of our colleagues at NBC New York, they knew each other, right, as people in the public eye in New York. There's one story, I think, from the New York Post, that he would sort of walk around with her in New York City and introduce her as the DA from Westchester County. He also knew her husband, had hired her husband, who was a lawyer at the time, her husband at the time as well, they've since divorced, and hired him to work on a development deal that he was trying to turn I think a private club into a golf course or something like this. And so the families were familiar. There's a long history of ties between Donald Trump and the Pirros. Mr. Pirro was convicted of tax evasion, federal tax evasion charges. And in the last 45 minutes of President Trump's first term, was pardoned by President Trump for those charges long after the conviction and sentence had been served. So there are a lot of ties between these folks.
So this job that she would be taking, it's different than every other U.S. attorney's office in that it's a federal prosecutor, but it's also like a local DA for Washington since we don't get to elect our own. In the past, what have been the typical qualifications? What's the typical resume for a U.S. attorney for D.C. looked like?
These are really well-trained lawyers, typically people who've been AUSAs, assistant U.S. attorneys, in this office or another U.S. attorney's office. Look at the most immediate prior U.S. attorney, Matt Graves, came up in that office, went to private practice, and came back to run the office. He knew how this worked. He knew all of the sides of this polygon that the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. has to deal with, right? And I think to our neighbors here in D.C., it's important to sort of reframe this discussion as you just did, that like Look, there are a lot of politics involved in this office, right? They handle investigations of politicians, and they handle threats against the president, and they handle all sorts of whistleblower stuff. They were obviously heavily involved in January 6th, largest prosecution that office has ever conducted. But they're also the folks who prosecute crime in D.C. And for our purposes, let's never forget that this is the person who is making decisions about public safety and criminal justice in D.C. And look, Jeanine Pirro has experience running an office. Whether you agree with her politics and how she'll run this office, that's a different discussion. But she definitely has experience running a prosecutor's office. And in D.C., where crime is on the decline now, I think it's really important to remember that that's a big part of that person's job.
So I think that, one of the things that's come up is the people will say, well, she hasn't had a law enforcement or prosecutorial job in 20 years. And so we don't know how much of what she believes is what the Westchester County prosecutor believed in the 1990s, or is what the Fox News personality said more recently. But so there's a little bit conjecture to think about what kind of impact she might have on DC, but think about some of the issues you've covered and the way that her discretion might affect them one way or the other.
Look, a bunch of things there. She certainly has a lot more experience than Ed Martin had as a prosecutor, right?
But he had none.
Right, exactly. Two, I think we don't know whether Ms. Pirro wants to keep this job full time or whether this is an interim appointment that would last another 120 days until someone else would take this position. As far as the discretion she could use, right, I think one of the issues that's biggest on my mind is how she will treat juveniles in D.C. Who have alleged to commit violent crime, right? And I think it is something that Matt Graves struggled with. I think as crime, especially committed allegedly by juveniles in D.C., got more serious, he took the position that more of those cases maybe should be tried as adults. I certainly think Ed Martin believed that. And politically, Donald Trump has made making D.C. safe a priority. And I think there would be pressure on whoever takes that job to treat juveniles accused of serious crime very seriously, which would mean putting them into the adult system, which in D.C. may or may not be what the folks who live here want. I also think D.C. is sort of on the forefront of second chances. And whether we believe that there is room for some second chance considerations for people who are convicted early in their lives of violent crime. And I don't know what Ms. Pirro thinks about that, but I'm very interested.
Pirro trafficked in falsehoods about the 2020 election. She was front and center in some of the litigation against Fox. Does she have any record of saying stuff one way or the other about January 6th, which was really kind of what did in Ed Martin?
Certainly not to the extent that Ed Martin does, right? I mean, he is an organizer of the Stop the Steal, represented as a criminal defense attorney some people who were charged with January 6th crimes. So certainly not to that extent. She was there in the room the night of the 2020 election when Trump starts to make some of these claims the election was rigged and whatever else. And in the days following, the reporting is that she sort of questions why vote tallies were changing. And as you point out, she is mentioned as a named litigant in both the Dominion and Smartmatic cases. And what I believe after January 6th, she does not endorse the violence. But look, there were, as you know, a lot of Republicans who in the immediate days after January 6th said that was abhorrent and we should never allow that again. And their opinions have since changed. My suspicion is that Democrats on the Judiciary Committee are going back to those days right now to see what she was saying on Fox.
So there's, just to get this out of the way, some of the other stuff she said on Fox. I'm curious, having covered this office, how much of this will affect her job. She'll have any ability to affect one way or the other. She's spoken out against sanctuary cities.
Sanctuary means that if an illegal commits a crime in a jurisdiction, they will not arrest, they will not give them to the feds, and they will not deport them. I wonder, what about equal protection? Maybe we ought to give American criminals the same benefit.
She says she hates the smell of weed.
I personally don't want to go anywhere where I have to smell that stinking smell. I don't. And it's like everything else in America. All of the rules are disappearing and we're turning into a third world country. Do whatever you want.
She made an Instagram post about LGBTQ ideology being taught in schools. She wanted to arrest Tesla vandals under RICO charges. Is this stuff that a U.S. attorney for D.C. really can impact one way or the other?
Yes. How much, I suppose, was the reason for my pause. The sanctuary cities one is an interesting one in D.C. because of the interesting nexus that we have between local laws and our federal partners being so close. So my understanding in D.C. is that MPD, D.C. police officers, don't necessarily run someone's immigration history when they are a victim or a suspect in a crime or an eyewitness for that matter. But that quickly after once you get into the court system here, because it is a federally run court system, that stuff is checked. So my assumption is she will make sure that work is done, and that if someone needs an immigration hold, she will comply with that. So she doesn't have to abandon her hatred for so-called sanctuary cities to do this job. The weed stuff is really interesting. You know, the first time we interviewed Ed Martin, after months of trying, was because he wanted to talk to us about a letter he'd written to a particular dispensary in the Palisades, and that he, you know, in his words, is just asking questions about their existence so close to schools up in that part of Northwest D.C. Well, a couple days later, it comes out there's a federal rider to another bill that prevents U.S. attorneys in the Justice Department from going after pot shops if there are local laws in place that allow medicinal marijuana. And so, you know, yeah, these U.S. attorneys have a pretty big bully pulpit to do and say what they want to do. There are restraints. And so if she hates the smell of weed, I'd encourage her, you know, have limited occasion to walk around D.C. some days. But
yeah, I don't think that's a problem.
But can she necessarily do anything about it? You know, I don't know. And the Tesla thing, look, one of the first things Ed Martin did was put out on X, you know, these very public letters to Elon Musk, saying, look, if you need help or your people are getting criticized, let me know. And we're not going to stand up for that. Offering to prosecute federal employees who are pushing back against Doge. You know, he's done the same with Tesla. So she can continue that if she believes that's the case. Now, you know, should that be the priority in the U.S. Attorney's Office? No.
If you've never visited the Folger Shakespeare Theater, now is the time. It's showing the Shakespearean classic Twelfth Night, but with a groundbreaking modern twist that brings pure joy. This is not the Shakespeare that you fell asleep reading in 10th grade. It is a contemporary, sexy production of Shakespeare's great comedy. Sure, there's loss, love, and identity, but there's also a sense of discovery, lavish costumes, and great modern music. The director used the term elegant kink while describing it to me, so you already know you're in for a ride. Think She's the Man meets RuPaul's Drag Race. Performances start on May 13th and run through June 22nd, and tickets are going fast. Don't wait. Go to folger.edu/12th night to purchase tickets. That's folger.edu/1, 2, TH night.
Hi, I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast. We've all set health goals: lose weight, exercise more, eat better. But without a plan, those goals often fade. That may have happened to you. It has definitely happened to me. And that's where Prolon comes in. Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet gives you a science-backed, structured approach to stay on track and see real results. And now Prolon is upping their game with the new next-gen 5-day program, delivering the same science-backed benefits in a cleaner, more convenient, and more flavorful format. Prolon is a plant-based nutrition program featuring soups, snacks, and beverages designed to nourish the body while keeping it in a fasting state, triggering cellular rejuvenation and renewal. Next Gen builds on the original Prolon with 100% organic soups and teas, a richer taste, and ready-to-eat meals. Developed over decades at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by top U.S. medical centers, Prolon has been shown to support biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, fat loss, and energy. I've been doing the 5-day program and I feel so much better. I really enjoy the tasty energy bars, the snacks and soups, and the fact that I can enjoy meals, even though the calorie count is super low. The flavors and textures are excellent. An olive oil snack here, broccoli and quinoa soup there, hibiscus tea, a yummy nut bar. It's got the benefits of a 5-day fast, but doesn't have the challenge of doing it with pure liquids. It's a system reset. And also, I know this sounds funny, but it's not. The packaging and directions are fantastic, clear, and well-organized and thoughtful. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering CityCast listeners 15% off site-wide, plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/city. That's PROLONLIFE.com/city to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/city. This episode of CityCast is sponsored by Babbel. Learning a new language opens the door to new friends, new cultures, maybe even a whole new life. So why not start the journey today with Babbel? You can start speaking a new language with confidence thanks to Babbel's conversation-based technique. It quickly teaches you useful words and phrases about the things you actually talk about in the real world. There are more than a dozen languages available for you to learn at your own pace, with material tailored to your individual proficiency level, interests, and time availability. I'm David Plott, CEO of CityCast, and I've been learning Spanish with Babbel and brushing up a teeny bit on my French. But there's also Turkish, Swedish, Dutch, German, many more languages. Babbel's tips and tools for learning a new language are approachable and accessible. It's like having a private tutor in your pocket. I particularly love Babbel's guided conversations, which let me practice real-world conversations. What to say at the doctor's office, how to leave a party, using speech recognition to make sure I'm getting the pronunciation right. Babbel's mobile app and website have real-time feedback, progress trackers, and clear visualizations. They're helping me improve my Spanish in only 10 minutes a day. So get talking with Babbel. I want you to learn another language, so I'm teaming up with Babbel to gift you 55% off subscriptions, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 55% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Babbel.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
So talk me quickly through how we got to this point. I don't recall a U.S. attorney for Washington being rejected or being pulled because he would have been rejected before. What was it that did in Martin's support?
I think we could have seen this in the days right after he's put in office, right? While we learned more about the issues that ultimately sunk Ed Martin, we certainly knew the existence of these issues from day one. Ed Martin was, as a private citizen, a very ardent supporter of the Stop the Steal movement. This movement that, believed that the election in 2020 was stolen, that morphs into support for January 6th defendants at large. He has said repeatedly that he believes hundreds of people were over-prosecuted on that day. And I think that ultimately is the issue that Senator Tillis decided he can no longer support this guy, right? So, and what Tillis said this week was that if he was up for any other U.S. attorney's office in America, he would support him. But not in D.C., not with what he believes about January 6th.
So how's he handling this turn of events?
I don't know him real well, but let's keep in mind Martin finds out that he's out of this job the same way that the rest of us do. As a reporter asked the question in the Oval Office. And in Martin's telling, at the time he's in his office there at the U.S. Attorney's office downtown in another meeting about some crime fighting issue. And his spokesperson walks in the door and says, "Hey, you should see this." And they watch together as Trump lets the world know that Ed Martin's time as U.S. Attorney in D.C. is over. He said that he had meetings up on Capitol Hill scheduled for the afternoon and canceled those after Trump said his nomination process was done. And I think he was, clearly disappointed. In an interview a couple hours after Trump let him go, he said he really liked the job and really had hoped to keep it. I think he knew this was certainly a possibility, though. And then he puts out that, I don't know if you've seen it, out on X, the picture of him as the Pope.
Well, so like the Trump's announcement and the white smoke happened almost simultaneously.
Yes. And then a couple minutes later, Martin puts out this sort of AI generated picture of him as the new pope, which was weird for 100 reasons, right? Like Ed Martin is a devout Catholic. And I was surprised he would do that given the importance of that moment in the Catholic Church. I asked him about it, and he said, people were pinging me from all over wondering how I was doing, and I wanted to let them know that I was going to be all right, and I thought it was funny.
And then, right after you finish interviewing him, this crazy thing happens.
So we had done one interview, and another interview was underway, and it was right out on the street in front of the U.S. Attorney's Office, and a woman walking her dog across the street sort of notices that Ed Martin's out there doing an interview, not with us, but another outfit. And she goes, "Oh my God, is that Ed Martin?" And she crosses the street. We're not really certain what's going to happen. And she immediately sort of laces into this, profanity. And she doesn't like him. It's clear she doesn't like him, and gets close enough and just spits right on him, and then turns around and walks away.
What'd he do?
I think he was shocked. He didn't do anything. She gets right in his face and says, "You're Ed Martin, F you." And he says, "Hi, how are you?" And then she spits on him. And I think he was taken aback. He didn't chase her. He didn't try and grab her. There was obviously no security around to do anything. But it on a human level, felt sort of bad for the guy. Like, he's been divisive. People don't agree with his politics. But where are we? That's not DC. Right? I mean, that's not, like you lose your job in a very public way and then you get spit on to end the day. Like, it was not DC's proudest moment.
But just to be clear, he's probably going to wind up with another, or he's already been named to a couple other DOJ jobs.
It's like Assistant Deputy Attorney General, I think is the formal title, but he's also going to be the pardon attorney, which is a really big job, considering that he is a guy who sort of got in trouble for dismissing some of the cases that were pardoned on January 6th. And then the other, I want to make sure I get it right, but it's something like the Weaponization Task Force. And he's always going to sit within the Justice Department to examine how the Biden administration weaponized the Department of Justice. Now, your audience is smart enough to know the irony in that.
Yeah, they're pretty bright. So let's talk about how Pirro, insofar as we can tell, compares to Martin. In her Westchester days, she made a point of saying she was pretty moderate on the sort of social issues that, Martin was a career-long anti-abortion activist. I don't think that's been part of Pirro's brand.
I don't think so. And I think to be elected in Westchester County, I think she could not have been. And my assumption is in the intervening years, she likely has become more conservative. I think one of the more interesting comparisons, however, is how much will Republicans be willing to question that record, given her star status on Fox News? The Post reports that by their count, she would be like the 22nd or 23rd person in the administration connected to Fox News. It is clear that this is a bench for the Trump administration.
I imagine she's taken a huge pay cut.
Right, which is part of the reason I wonder if she's taking this for a short time and then going back to some position. It has to be a huge pay cut, yes.
So when I was reading up on this, there's this whole question of whether Trump even has the authority to appoint her. Ed Martin was serving as interim. There's a maximum time limit. He had to be confirmed by May 20th, or that was it. Now Trump has appointed Pirro as interim. Does the 120-day clock start again now?
I don't think we know the full answer to that. I think there is some path that this goes to court to suggest that Trump can't do this. They have about a week until Martin sort of has to be out of the job by May 20th. And so I think we don't know that yet. I think there's a possibility that people will take Trump to court for appointing yet another interim. Although once he's out, the process could be that a district judge in D.C. appoints someone to that job until someone is confirmed.
And the irony there is that the head of the district court is Judge Oberg, who Trump famously dislikes.
Well, and sir, right. I mean, we're the largest small town in the world, right? But yeah, I think we don't know the answer to the final question of when and whether Ms. Pirro will serve.
So insofar as people can read the tea leaves of the Senate, in the event that Pirro is not just interim, but intends to hold the job permanently and needs to be confirmed by the Senate, how do the politics of that look?
It's tight in the Judiciary Committee. She loses one Republican on the Judiciary Committee, she doesn't get out of committee. But I think that puts the Republicans in a really tough spot to go against someone who has become both a very vocal supporter of the president and someone who Republican voters know and likely enjoy on Fox News. I think it is a harder political discussion. I think also let's see what comes out. Ed Martin got in trouble for not being able to remember hundreds of interviews he had done with Russian state media and got in trouble for that. The contents of some of those interviews came up as well. Over 19 years, Ms. Pirro has said a lot of things on Fox News. Highlight reels are certainly coming. And I think if they want to fight over that, that's likely to be where it comes from, not her work as the DA.
And Senator Tillis, who sunk Ed Martin, has already said he's into this pick.
And so who's the one that's not? Who are Democrats going to grab on that committee? Adam Schiff and Dick Durbin may not be supporters, right? But they don't rule the day on that committee.
Is there a next date that we need to look for if we're trying to follow this story?
I think the next big thing is when she comes to the office, right? And what does she do right away? We don't know exactly when she's going to show up in D.C. Fox News, I don't want to say cut ties in sort of a way that, that she had done something wrong. But Fox News was very quick to point out that she was no longer an employee as soon as she was appointed by the president or at least nominated by the president. But I think her arrival in D.C. Will be treated differently than Ed Martin's. And I would assume a press rollout for her would be a little more managed than was Ed Martin's. But certainly to keep an eye on exactly what she does when she shows up there, right? One of the things we know about, for as many changes that have happened in that office, the team that's running the D.C. Superior Court, fighting crime in D.C. has remained largely the same. Does she, as an experienced prosecutor, make changes to that quickly? One thing to watch. What is her outreach to the communities in D.C. that need a prosecutor on the job every day? Ed Martin had a pretty rough rollout in his one meeting in Anacostia. So I'd be really curious to see what outreach she makes to communities in D.C. That rely on that office, and then what the Senate does. But the Senate has time. I think we all focused on what the Senate Judiciary Committee was doing with Ed Martin. The reality is they have a lot of U.S. attorneys across this country to get through. So I can't imagine she jumps to the top of the list.
Hey, Ted, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Before we go, I want to give a big thank you to our newest CityCast DC neighbors, Betsy S., Greg E., Scott S., Dustin L., and Edith B. Thank you for joining. If you too want to become a CityCast neighbor, join at membership.citycast.fm. And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, do us a favor and rate the show. Maybe even leave a review. It helps other people find us. Thank you. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.